dollars of unaccounted for spending in the Department of Defense, and I was wondering what you plan to do to address that.
Well, the
Thank you.
let me talk about just going forward as opposed to looking backwards. I intend to end this war in Iraq. We're going to do it as carefully. We're going to be as careful getting out as we were careless getting in. Nothing precipitous about it. We're going to bring combat brigades out at a pace of about 1 to 2 per month. At that pace, it'll take about 16 months to get our combat troops out. We're going to send a couple of combat brigades to Afghanistan in order to help go after the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. But we'll still be reducing rotations, tours, and people will start coming home. Now, that will save some money. We are going to have to use some of that money to deal with all the veterans who are coming home, many of whom have post-traumatic stress disorder, many of whom have disabilities that need care. I want us to treat our veterans better than we've been treating them. And that's going to cost a little bit of money. And we should have done this in the first place. This should be part of our budget. If you're planning to go to war, the commander-in-chief should say up front, what do we expect in terms of casualties? What do we expect in terms of veterans that we're going to have to care for? And build it in. And we have consistently shortchanged this. And I've got some disagreements with John McCain on veterans care. I mean, we honor his service. He wore the uniform of this country with bravery and distinction, but when it comes to his record on a lot of veteran services, he hasn't been there. And so we're going to have to really work hard on that. We're also going to have to reset our military. National Guard units all across America, their equipment has been destroyed. It's got to be rebuilt. They're not in a position to respond the way they need to, or their readiness has been lessened as a consequence of not having time to train, their equipment being gone. So that's going to cost some money. And I actually think that we've got to increase our ground forces a little bit so that we don't, in a future situation, a future conflict, get caught in the situation where people are going on 3, 4, 5 tours of duty without any rest in between. It's too much of a stress on military families. So all these things are going to cost some money. But having said that, what I do want to do is to audit, Pentagon spending and figure out, if there are weapon systems that are outdated and aren't working, then we should end them. If we are wasting money with contractors that aren't giving us what we're paying for, then we have to sever those contracts. We have to stop with the no-bid contract systems that Halliburton and other companies have made billions of dollars on. So, I should add, by the way, I want to do that not just for the Pentagon, I want to do it for all of government. I mean, one of the things I believe in is that we should have a much more efficient government than we have. I don't want to see taxpayer money wasted because we've got too many needs elsewhere. So if there's a program that doesn't work, let's end it so we can fund the programs that do work that are currently being underfunded. And that's why I said this in my acceptance speech in Denver, that we are going to audit line by line every dollar of federal spending. And I want it to be exposed so that the public can see where our money is going. We've already done this. I worked with a Republican, Tom Coburn, to list on the internet every dollar of federal spending so that you can look it up on a searchable database on the internet, because that's how you find out when a bridge to nowhere is about to be built. That's how you find out about it and start putting pressure to make sure that it doesn't get built. All right, next question. Right here.
My name is Elizabeth Morris Downey. I live in Fenton. And we've just heard the confirmation yesterday of the rumor about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac going into conservatorship. and that is just the latest in a string of financial disasters. I'd like to ask you, Senator, what your plans are for effective and fair governmental regulation of all of these financial institutions that are pulling us right down the drain.
It's a great question. That's a great question. You know, so much of this housing crisis could have been prevented if the feds had done their job regulating many of these agencies, many of these institutions. Now, part of the problem is that we've got an outdated regulatory structure. It dates back to the 1930s. And so regular banks are actually pretty well regulated. Regular banks, you know, that are FDIC insured, they've got to have certain capital requirements. Their books are regularly monitored. But what's happened is that you've got this whole new area of finance that is pouring money into the system and is not being regulated at all. And they're coming up with new instruments and these subprime loans and this and that, and nobody got serious about regulation. I was talking about this stuff 2 years ago, saying, 3 years ago, I said, we've got to stop with these predatory loans, these subprime loans that are trapping people into interest rates that will boost up in a moment's notice, and suddenly people get taken for all they're worth, or they lose their home, or the fees and the interest are hidden. But unfortunately, the financial institutions, the banks that were practicing some of these, were engaged in some of these practices, they've got clout in Washington. And that's why this whole issue of lobbyists is so important. I mean, it's not just an abstract thing. Lobbyists, when they are making big contributions to members of Congress, when they are in rooms writing legislation, when they have disproportionate influence, they drown out your voice. And after a while, you're not being represented. And there are real-life consequences to this. Because what happens is, while somebody's asleep at the switch on regulating our financial institutions, the housing market goes haywire. And now, not only are to this, because what happens is, while somebody's asleep at the switch on regulating our financial institutions, the housing market goes haywire. And now, not only are people losing their homes, but taxpayers are also going to be potentially on the hook for some of the bill. So here's what I intend to do. I've already talked about how we are going to revamp and update our financial regulatory systems. We are going to strengthen some of the regulations that are already in place for those areas of finance that didn't exist back in the 30s. We're going to create a whole new set of financial regulations. The basic principle is going to be that if you expect the federal government to step in and to provide support if something goes wrong, then you're going to have to follow by our rules. And you're not going to be able to just have a situation, which is what happened with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, where you know, heads I win, tails you lose, and you being the taxpayer. This young lady just keeps on standing up in front of me all the time. Say, sit down. You've got enough pictures. This is about the, you don't think I was noticing?